Hello and welcome to today's webinar, Intro to Reserve Studies. This webinar is sponsored by Association Reserves. My name is Paige Sharman. I'm the Director of Marketing for Association Reserves, and I'll be serving as your moderator for today. Intro to Reserve Studies is a 45-minute webinar designed to help you better understand your role in guiding your association toward a stable and successful future. Getting there requires a clear grasp of the financial challenges facing each board and community, and an accurate understanding of what a reserve study is, what it includes, and how to use it effectively. In this session, we'll break down the core issues. No frills, no complicated math, just a straightforward explanation of what you need to know to make smart, future-focused decisions at your association. Your success hinges on setting aside the right amount of money to properly maintain your property, and we're here to help you get that right. Reserve funding decisions are among the most important financial decisions a board makes. These choices impact your community for years, so avoiding costly mistakes like deferred maintenance, special assessments, or safety risks is crucial. Due to the number of participants today, everyone has been muted, but you can submit questions anytime by typing them into the Q&A box at the bottom of your Zoom control panel. Not the chat box, but the Q&A so that we make sure we don't miss it. We'll address as many questions as possible during the final 10 minutes of the webinar. This webinar has been approved by the Community Association Managers International Certification Board, CAMICB, for 1 CE credit toward the CMCA certification. I will be emailing certificates of completion within 1 week. Just a reminder, the credentialing committee does monitor attendance, so make sure you're with us for the full webinar. Our hosts today are Derek Eckert, Sean Kargari, and Sean Andersen, Reserve Specialists and Office Presidents with Association Reserves. Sean Andersen is the President of Association Reserves Orange County, Inland Empire, and Coachella Valley offices. Sean has worked with hundreds of community associations. He is recognized for his straightforward communication style and his ability to translate reserve study data into practical board-level decision-making guidance. Sean focuses on helping associations build strong, sustainable funding plans. Sean Kargari is the President of Association Reserve's Los Angeles office, also serving Central Coast, Hawaii, and Nevada. He has prepared reserve studies for a wide range of properties, including condominiums, high-rises, luxury resorts, schools, and public facilities across the United States and internationally. Sean brings broad industry experience and strategic insight to helping communities plan responsibly for the future. Derek Eckert is the President of Association Reserves San Francisco. Derek is known for his clear, practical approach to reserve planning and his ability to help boards understand complex funding and regulatory requirements. He closely works with associations to develop long-term funding strategies that promote financial stability and confidence. Together, Derek, Sean, and Sean will walk you through essentials of reserve studies with clarity and insight. And with that, I'd like to turn the floor over to Sean Andersen. Sean?
Thank you, Paige, and thank you everybody for being here. I'm really excited to do this presentation with Sean and Derek. They are so insightful, and this is always a really great presentation to do together. So let's talk about what reserves are. The practical definition is that it's money that an association sets aside to offset the ongoing deterioration. Now, ongoing deterioration is going to be something you're going to hear us talk about quite a bit because that's one of the essentials of reserves and reserve studies. And it's going to be done over a long period of time for large repair and replacement projects. One thing I'm going to draw your attention to is something that's not on the screen, and that's notice that it is not a savings account. One thing I always try to drive home it with board members and managers is we cannot get into the mindset of reserves are a savings account, because if we start thinking it's a savings account, we're not going to want to spend the money, and we need to spend this money. We're charging our owners through their assessments for reserves. We need to take that money, but we also need to spend the money. If the roof is at the end of its life, we don't want to hold out. We want to make sure we spend that money because we've taken that money from our owners. So make sure we get into the mindset that it is not a savings account, and it's for large repair and replacement projects. We'll talk a little bit more with slides down the road a little bit here about what that entails and how we come up with which projects should be included. So let's talk about our budget. The budget, you're going to have the operating funds, and those are going to be your routine costs. They're unrestricted use. They're expected to be spent in that year. So typical with that is going to be insurance, your management fees. You're going to pay your pool guy with that, your landscaper, stuff like that. So that's just money coming in, going out. Those are just the day-to-day things. But with reserve funds, so reserve funds are more infrequent. We're going to want to think of these as projects that we're going to do. They are restricted use. We don't want to use reserve funds for operating expenses. We want to make sure we're spending reserve funds on reserve projects. And so those funds are going to accumulate as the need arises. So we talked earlier about, long periods of time for repair and replacement projects. The money's going to accumulate over time in reserves, and then we're going to spend the money when it needs to be spent. And so typically, for our purposes, that's going to be roofing, painting, pavement, HVACs, elevators, and the one thing I like to add here is balconies here in California, because that's become a major reserve expense that our clients are seeing.
Yeah, great point there, Sean. It's definitely a big deal in California these days, balconies.
So what is a reserve study? First and foremost, it is a budget planning tool. It is not an action plan. It is a budget planning tool. We're going to use this to create a budget to set our communities up for long-term success. So it's a budget planning tool, which is going to identify the current status of the reserve fund. So in our world, that's a percent funded. It's going to give us the current status of the fund, and it's going to provide a stable and equitable funding plan. We're going to give you that monthly reserve allocation that's going to offset those future major common area expenditures. So hopefully, in a perfect world, what you're going to do is you're going to use the reserve study to create your budget, and that's going to help build funds throughout time to to do those large projects. So the three levels of service that you're going to be dealing with is, number one is a level one reserve study, which we would call a full reserve study. That includes a site inspection, and that's generally for communities that have never had a reserve study before. It is literally done from scratch, and you're going to be establishing the component list for the first time there, and then build forward. One thing I always want to point out here is that you only should have to do a level one reserve study once, because if you've had a thorough and competent reserve study, you shouldn't have to do a level one again. I always say, if I've counted 30 light poles in your community, don't pay me again to count 30 light poles. There's confusion out there that people think that because the Davis-Stirling Act says you have to do a level one reserve study every 3 years. That's not true. You need to do an on-site site inspection every 3 years. So after you've done your level one reserve study, 3 years later, then you do a level two reserve study, which is an update with site visit. So with that, you're going to get a new site inspection. Your site inspector is going to reevaluate the conditions. They're going to look at the components. They're just not going to requantify them. And again, that should be done every 3 years. And then in the 2 years in between, we're going to do a level three update, no site visit. And even though there's no site visit done, there is still a lot of work that gets put into a level three reserve study. The level three reserve study, we're going to inflate the costs. We're going to adjust the history. A lot of communities do a lot of projects throughout the year. We want to make sure those are captured in those level three reserve studies. And that way, as we do that on-site visit every 3 year, we have all the information we need going forward. So we do a level one time, we do a level two every 3 years, and we do level three reserve studies on the 2 years in between. So when should we start? I'm going to open this up for a little bit of a conversation, but my feeling is the earlier the better. So if you are a 12/31 fiscal year end, which is the vast majority of our clients, I would recommend you start getting bids for your reserve studies in April. You're going to want to prove it in May. You're going to want the reserve study to get going so that it's done and put to bed by August or September, because you need to get your budget done. And that because we ultimately need to send the disclosures out in November. So we don't want to be doing tons of revisions at the last minute. We don't want to be starting a 12/31 reserve study in October, because every reserve analyst is super busy in October. And so you might not get the reserve study in time. It might not be useful in your budgeting. So be thinking maybe in April, earliest March, start getting your bids for your 1231 reserve studies, get going on them as soon as possible so that we have the reserve study set by September so that we're using it to create our new budget. I just want to open up to Sean and Derek to see if you have anything to add to that.
Yeah, Sean, I totally agree. I strongly encourage that the board finalize the reserve study at least 1 month before their annual budget meeting. So that means you should be obtaining the draft reserve study 2 to 3 months before that annual budget meeting. That gives you plenty of time to review the reserve study document, scrutinize the assumptions, and feel confident in absorbing the information, finalizing it, and bring it to your annual budget meeting as a useful tool. You don't want to save the reserve study as sort of a unveiling ceremony at that annual budget meeting. You want to have it thorough understanding well before that.
Yeah, we have clients in Northern California starting their year-end budget process now. So for calendar year-end clients, 1231, they're literally starting their reserve studies now. It's a process, it takes time, and we're open to multiple revisions for them along the way if they get the project started early. But yeah, I mean, if April rolls around, you should at least have a proposal in your hand, and you should probably think about getting your reserve studies started around April or May, so that there's plenty of time.
Yeah, we just want to avoid time crunches. We know when these things need to be done, so we want to avoid time crunches. Okay, so the reserve study has two parts to it, the physical analysis and the financial analysis. So the physical analysis, we can go to the next slide.
Yeah.
Physical analysis is going to include the site inspection, obviously. Your site inspector is going to go out, quantify, photograph, and evaluate the reserve components. I always recommend, as board members and managers, try to go on a site inspection with your reserve analyst at least once. You want to see what they're seeing. You want to give your input too. Remember, this is your home. If you drive by a monument sign that looks terrible every day and it bugs you, let them know. Say, hey, I don't that thing's dated. And the board really, it's on our heart that we want to get rid of this. We want to do that. I really definitely recommend you guys go out, do a walkthrough with your site inspector, see what they're seeing. And so as I talked about with level one, it's going to include that quantifying. Level two, it's going to include the photographing and evaluating. So then part two is going to be the financial analysis. At the start of engagements in our office, what we do is we ask the management or any of the contact people for a vendor list because we want to do tons of research. We contact all of your vendors. We want to talk to your pool vendor. We want to see when do they anticipate that pool heater is going to fail. We want to know about how much is it going to cost to replace. We have an internal database that we track costs, so that's going to just give us more and more information. So research is definitely a key component to what we do. We definitely want discussion. We want discussion with managers. We want to make sure that our conclusions are understood. One of the worst case scenarios I see for myself as a project manager is that the manager just drops off the reserve study to board members and nobody knows what's going on in the reserve study. And they all just look at it and go, I don't know. And I hate this because they're recommending a special assessment. I want to make sure that the board and the manager know exactly why I'm recommending what I'm recommending.
Sean, I would also point out that like we want to have discussions with the board members on site. I mean, they're the ones that know their community. They live there, they sleep there. We come on site for a few hours, sometimes it's a whole day, but we're there just capturing as much information as we can. The board members are there every single day and they're seeing these things with their own eyes. So anytime we can get information, discussion from a board member, like a president or a treasurer, it's just so valuable.
Yeah, I agree. It's very valuable. Okay, so the three outcomes, these are all stated in the executive summary, are number one, the component list, and that's the building blocks of the reserve study. It's going to give you the useful life, remaining life, and cost. And that's the data that's going to build the other two outcomes. So that's going to help us then determine what the percent funded is. So that's going to demonstrate the strength of the fund. And then it's going to state the funding plan with a plan going forward, how we're going to reach success within our community. So let's talk about the component list a little bit and how we create it and how do we determine what components do we include. And the way we do that is with all things. We rely heavily on National Reserve Study standards. And the National Reserve Study Standards three-part test tells us that number one, the component has to be the association's obligation. So we're not replacing people's furniture in their units. We're not doing stuff that's outside of the community. It's got to be the association's obligation. It's got to be reasonably anticipated. So a lot of the time I'll get pushback as people say, how come you don't fund for earthquakes in the reserve study? Well, if Caltech can't predict it, I can't predict it either. It's not but we know that we can reasonably anticipate when a roof is going to fail. So we want to make sure that it passes that part of the test. Then it's got to be a significant cost to the association. And one way I love to point out with this is, so if we have pole lights in our community, we need to be thinking replacing the light bulbs in the pole lights is going to be an operating cost because it's really not a significant cost to the community, but replacing the pole lights themselves, that's a significant cost. So that's going to pass all three parts of that test. And so we do that with all of your common area components to determine your reserve component list. And so what that's going to do is that's going to filter out indeterminate projects, stuff we can't predict or understand life of the building projects. We're not going to replace things that don't have a determinate life. It's going to take out small cost projects, and I'm going to talk about this a little bit more, but it's going to take out capital improvements. And capital improvements are a hot topic with a lot of clients of mine right now. And I'll talk about that in a little bit. But what that means is that the typical reserve study in California is going to be 25 to 50 components. So it's not going to be a giant component list. And we see a lot of the same of those 25 and 50 components in California. So I really want to touch on capital improvements. When we are walking through a community and we see that, in this case, they have a lake on their property, and in their case, they don't have a dock, and they really want a dock. Well, we need to ask ourselves is, does it currently exist? Because if it doesn't currently exist, it fails the first part of our three-part test because it's not yet the association's obligation. So that by definition tells me that's a capital improvement. It's a new asset, and we don't want to take money that we've been saving or not saving, collecting for the deterioration of assets that currently exist and spend it on components that don't yet exist. So you can't use reserve funds to build that new deck. The caveat I'm going to add to this is it's not a capital improvement if it's a natural upgrade. If we're going from incandescent lights to LED lighting, that's okay because it's a natural upgrade. So that's really the fine line. We want to make sure it passes that first part of the three-part test. So the talking point there for when we're in our board meetings is reserves are for repairs and replacements, not new additions to the association. So natural upgrades are okay. We're okay to use that. All right. Then another big question that I get regularly is what happens if we're missing a component? What happens if your reserve analyst makes a mistake and misses an asset? Number one, you remember that the criteria for a reserve component, if you need to spend reserve money, is the three-part test, not if your reserve analyst has that component in the reserve study. So if you're missing a component, we ask ourselves, can we spend reserve funds for it? The first thing I'm going to say is look deeper in the report. Sometimes your reserve study is going to combine components. So it might be in the back of the report under, instead of pool heater, it's going to say pool equipment, and it's included in that. Refer to the three-part test. Does it pass that three-part test? And if it does, spend the money. It's your pool heater. You spend the money, you replace it, add it into the next reserve study. Call your reserve analyst and say, hey, you missed the pool heater. We replaced it. Here's what it cost. Here's and here's when we did it. That way it's going to appear in the reserve study in the future. And then what if it costs more or less? A lot of times we get accountants on the board, and I make this comment a lot because I'm married to an accountant. We get accountants on the board that really it fries their brain that the component in the reserve study, well, we use that pool heater as an example. In the reserve study, it says that the pool heater should be $6,000 to replace, and it's $7,000 to replace, and it kind of freaks them out. And they, well, what do we do now? Do we have to special assess for that extra amount of money? No. Number one, these are rough estimates. We try to get as close as possible, but they're just estimates. Perform the project. It is a common area asset. It passes the three-part test. Perform the project. Spend the money. Expect funds to be reallocated as they need to be, and update the reserve study going forward with, hey, it actually cost us $7,000 to replace that pool heater.
So, Sean, thank you so much. I'm going to jump in on these next slides. This is Sean Kargari from our Los Angeles office. So not all of the reserve components on your reserve study are created equally. Can you guys guess typically how many reserve components basically make up two-thirds, 80% of the overall significance of your obligations? We're thinking 50 components. How many of those are going to be the significant drivers of your reserve study? The answer is usually five. And these are the five significant projects. They're different for every community based on your age and style, how you're constructed. But you can probably guess off the top of your head, for instance, important projects are going to be roofing, asphalt, decking, major mechanical. So if you can, you as volunteer board members, you all have very busy schedules. You come home from work, full-time jobs. Becoming a master of 50 project schedules on your reserve study is probably not your highest priority in life. So we want to make this, an effective tool. And if you can identify the top five most significant projects on your reserve study and prioritize those, focus in on the preventive maintenance, completing these projects on schedule, and maximizing their overall useful lives, this will result in the more stable reserve outcomes, the best case scenarios for success. And there's actually a chart in the reserve study that breaks this down, but don't always think about just the largest cost. It's really the cost per year. How often is this project going to come up? So, when we're looking at the component list, naturally we're going to see the biggest costs, and those are going to jump out first. And it's natural to view $100,000 project as being more significant than a $50,000 project, as shown on the next slide. You're going to say, okay, we really should prioritize this project. We need to learn as much as possible. But it's really important to look at the useful lives. If a $100,000 project doesn't come up for every 20 or 30 years, its actual cost per year is relatively minor compared to a project half of the cost, but it comes up every 5 years. So it's sometimes it's the smaller scale projects because they pop up more often. Those are the ones that you should prioritize, hone in on. If you can master and rein in these projects and avoid surprises with them, then you're going to avoid surprises with your budgets for years to come. And that's the main point.
Yeah, Sean, if you notice the $50,000 every 5 years is twice as much impact on the budget. And one of the things that I think is a funny, back when $1 million was a lot of money, there used to be the treasurers would just go and look down and see, oh, there's $1 million expense, push that out 30 years or something like that. And they're ignoring something like the painting that's actually costing them significant amounts of money.
Correct. And oftentimes, there's discussions about the component scheduling. pushing back, a 20-year project, a couple years, isn't going to change the trajectory at all, the funding plan. Um, but there's communities, especially the PUDs, that need to have tree trimming in the reserve study because it's irregular. It's not a fixed annual expense. There's big spikes every 2, 3 years. As a board, if you can negotiate better tree trimming fees, that can have a huge impact on your reserve funding plan. Things like that. It's not always just the roads or the monuments, things that jump out. It can be sort of like the routine costs you guys are encountering. So, I don't expect you guys to have a file on all 50 projects on your component list. If the pool heater fails after 1 year or two, yeah, that's unfortunate, but it's not going to impact the funding plan. But if you neglect the five most significant projects, whatever those are, and they get half the useful life that they should have, that's when the budget is thrown out the window and you're looking at major special assessments and cash flow, crunches. So that's what we want to avoid. But how do we measure this overall picture? We get a lot of questions on how reserves strength is calculated. Is it a magic number? 100,000 in reserves or $1 million in reserves? That sounds great, but it could be very misleading. So it's never a cash balance. We always measure it based on your percent funded, and that is derived by a very specific calculation. For every one of your projects, the calculation is applied to them individually. So it's their current age divided by their useful life, multiplied by the current cost, and that equals their fully funded balance. I know this is a bunch of jargon at the moment, but we will illustrate this. This calculation is applied to each project individually. We tally up that total and then compare it to your reserves to arrive at your percent funded. But let's take a closer look at the calculation so it makes a little more sense. So we have a simple project here, pool furniture every 5 years, cost of $4,600. How much should you have at this point in time? The key is the remaining useful life. The project is due now. So since it has zero life, you should have the full project value in reserves. Next slide. There you go. So, since the project is due now, its current cost and its fully funded balance will match because you need all the funds on hand. We need to execute this project based on the schedule. But what if you have more life on a project? We have a simple pool project here for $10,000. I wish they all cost that low. But it's at its halfway point. It has 5 years remaining on its life. It's only 5 years old. How much should we have right now? The answer is not the full 10,000, but 5,000, half of its value. And I don't want to confuse you guys because I just threw out half a bunch of times. But if you have 5,000 in your reserves at this moment, and this magically was the only project you ever had to worry about, you would be 100% funded right now. And that's the key. That's a source of confusion. A lot of boards assume that percent funded is based on current overall replacement cost. It's not. It's based on the deterioration value of all your projects. And this way, it's a pay-as-you-go method. In your reserve contributions, as Sean was saying earlier, they're offsetting a current deterioration value. And you're not supposed to be paying ahead of schedule. You're just paying for the current cost month to month, year to year. And if your contributions are matching that value, then it's truly a user fee. You're not doing some future owner a favor. You're paying for your unit's share of the cost for the amount of time you choose to live there.
Yeah, Ed, just to put an exclamation point on that, I get a lot of questions of isn't the fully funded balance the cost to replace everything at once? And it's absolutely not the case. And even there, it's like I've never seen a community have to replace everything at once. So it's an interesting mythology that's been out there for a long time.
I did have one community where all 50 to 100 projects were all due because they've never completed a single project in their 30 years. And that was the one situation where their fully fund balance matched the project cost because they were all due. So that was a unicorn type event. So that's extremely rare and something to definitely avoid. So we then once we know what the fully funded balance is, if ideally you should have 500,000 in reserves to be 100% funded, then we're going to compare that to your reserve fund balance, and that's how we get your percent funded. And this is a much better way of measuring reserve fund strength because any cash value is truly a mystery. What does it mean? So, percent funded calculation, why it matters, and this is a really good chart. But let's look at this really quick. The fully funded, when you reach that level, that really means that your contributions, your reserve transfers are in balance with that ongoing deterioration. You're keeping up with the deterioration pace, the ongoing value of that. And so they're basically in harmony. When a project reaches the end of its life cycle, the funding has been building up to complete that project on schedule. And that's the main point. It gives you the ability to pull the trigger on important projects based on the necessity at that time. But you want to avoid situations where you have important critical projects that are being pushed back because the funds simply are there, and that's when that has a negative impact on the overall community. To visualize the overall percent funded ranges here, it's kind of like a credit card score for communities. You know, uh, so basically, if you're 0 to 30% funded, your reserves are considered to be in a weak position, and you can see there on the left-hand side, the red columns. What it boils down to is that you have a very high risk of special assessment year to year, and that's why it's considered to be in a weak range. 30 to 70% funded is considered to be more stable, a fair reserve position. The risk becomes much lower. And then once you get above 70% funded or higher, your reserves are considered to be in a strong position. You can see why. The risk of 70 special assessments once you reach 70% funded or higher is about 2 to 3%. So you don't have to be 100% funded to have strong reserves, which is nationally considered to be strong reserves, not just like a feel. It's an actual professional opinion. You do have a strong, very well maintained reserve fund. Many communities, as we all know, are more in the lower range, but take note if you can increase your percent funded from 30% to 40%, you're cutting your risk of special assessment in half, as you can see on this graph. So once you really can, reach that 50% threshold, that's really the best foundation to build from there. So our funding plans are not designed to get you 100% funded in 1 year. We're trying to provide enough near-term cash to complete your projects, but from there, we're going to gradually build up your percent funded strength. So what happens if this is completely ignored? It's not just about special assessments, which unfairly punishes the current owners no matter how short a time they lived at the community. Deferred maintenance is really a big one. It can really almost move up to the number 1 spot. What that means is you didn't waterproof your balconies for years, and now the water intrusion caused structural damage. So a $5,000 waterproofing project for that balcony deck has turned into a $50,000 reconstruction. Or the planters were allowed to leak into the parking garage for years, and now they corroded the rebar, and we're looking at $1 million renovation cost. So, unfortunately, some of your major, most important reserve projects are not static. I wish they could just it could just be a matter of, oh, that's ugly and unattractive, but we need more time to save. Oftentimes, it's very critical to complete these projects on schedule to avoid deferred maintenance. And once you start trying to do band-aid repairs and avoiding the big problem, you're increasing your higher net costs because they're going to charge more for, reactive patch jobs on the roof rather than a comprehensive project. We do see decline in home values because of the declining curb appeal. And lastly, and we don't like to use scare tactics at all, but it is a reality that there are liabilities when certain components fail, especially if they pertain to health and safety. If you have like an elevator system that's down for a whole year, that could be a real liability because there's probably years of warning and maybe decades of reserve studies saying you're not funding enough for this project. So keep that in mind as you're running the affairs of your community.
Sean, I just want to point out that number 2 and number 4 are alternative ways to pay for reserves, and they're very expensive ways to pay for reserves. Home values are extremely expensive in California, and if your home value dips by just 1% or maybe 3 or 4%, that's going to be much more expensive than a special assessment or even just monthly reserve contributions. And then to Sean's point, Sean Kargari's point, he pointed out a situation where the balcony needed to be repaired at $5,000. They didn't repair it right away. And then they needed to fully redo it, replace the deck itself, and it ended up costing $50,000. This is a situation I see often, probably weekly with my clients. Not particular clients, but the array of clients. I see this happening. And so if you can avoid the deferred maintenance and be proactive, it's less expensive. And so I just wanted to point that out.
Very good points.
And that's a good point, a good transition period. I'm going to now take over and talk about the next number of slides. And so I would like to start by talking about outcome number 3, which is the funding plan. So Sean Andersen already touched on the component list, which is the building blocks of the reserve study. You need to make sure that that's right to make sure you're on target. Sean Kargari touched on reserve fund strength, which we know as percent funded. It's a way that we can determine what the risk is of special assessment, deferred maintenance, decline in property values. And then I'm going to touch on the funding plan. So the funding plan is the forward-looking projections and the cash flow analysis. And what we do for the majority of our clients is set them on a path to be 100% funded over the duration of the reserve study funding plan. So we don't want to get you there tomorrow necessarily, but we want to develop a funding plan with intermediate goals that will help build you up towards 100% funded. And I just want to mention that the way we do this is if a component costs $10, then we want to set aside $10 for that component each and every year. Well, actually, it's $1 per year in order to get it to the 10-year mark. And what are contributions? It's a bill. So you need to pay just like you would pay for your water bill or your electric bill. You don't want to pay to offset the deterioration of each of these individual components. And I'm going to show you that in the next few slides. So here's a simplified component list. And the one that's highlighted is the pool resurfacing project. And if that pool costs $10,000 to redo, Sean Kargari pointed out that that's a really inexpensive pool earlier on, and it needs to be done every 10 years, then you should be setting aside $1,000. That's what the cost is per year for that particular pool. And alternatively, you have another component project called the asphalt seal project. It costs $5,000 to do every 5 years. And it also costs $1,000 per year. And so I know the Olympics just finished up, the Winter Olympics, but we have a Summer Olympics on screen here. And that yellow line, it represents the pace line. And what the pace line represents is deterioration at your association. And so the swimmers are swimming and trying to keep up with that pace line. And what that pace line represents in this slide here is the deterioration of all the components, right? You want to try to keep up with that pace line to make sure that you're on target and you have the funds available to take care of the projects when they come due. And so when we're able to break down each of the cost estimates of the components on a per year basis, we're able to get a number. In this case, it's a little more than $20,000. It's $20,170. And that equals the pace line, right? And so if you're maintaining or keeping up with that pace line, then you're paying your fair share of the bill that's associated with the deterioration at your community. And when we think about percent funded, 100% is theoretical or ideal. But if you're a community association and you're funded just below 60%, we'll say it's 55%, which happens to be about the average here in California, if you contribute at that baseline of $20,170 per year, what you're going to get is probably about 55% funded each and every year over the duration of the 30 years. And it's going to be pretty stable and consistent. But if you're able to contribute more than the $20,170 per year, you're going to exceed the baseline, and you're going to make up for being 55% funded, and you're going to have a trajectory of essentially building your reserve funds up towards that 100% theoretical ideal funding level over a 30-year duration. And if you're at 55% funded and you contribute less than $20,170, your your percent funded is actually going to deteriorate or fall below into that weak funding position over the duration of these 30 years. And so here's just another way to illustrate it. We don't want you to be 100% funded tomorrow or next year. We're developing plans that help our clients build up funds over the duration of the cash flow analysis, which is a 30-year period. And so in this case, for this client, they're just slightly above 80% funded. And within a 5-year period, they get closer to about 95% funded. And then in 10 to 15 years, they're closer to that 100% funding level. And on screen, there's a lot of numbers here, but I just want to point out that there's no need to hurry to get yourself to 100% funded. In time, you'll do that as long as you're able to contribute more than the baseline. So remember, we had that $20,170 per year number. These are some different numbers on screen now, but if you're able to contribute above that baseline, you're going to build up your percent funded from 83.8% to essentially 98.3% in about a 10-year period. Another thing I wanted to point out is that while the fully funded balance actually increases each and every year, most often, there are some years where it actually decreases. And that has a lot to do with you taking on a lot of expenses, finishing those expenses, and then having the remaining useful life reset. So in year 2024 on screen, the fully funded balance was $5.78 million. And then in 2025, it became $5 million and change. And that's because in the year 2024, they took on $1.5 million worth of reserve projects.
Yeah, and Derek, I think that's a really good point too, in that a lot of people get scared to spend money because they think it's going to drop their percent funded, but you don't need as much cash on hand. And so as you can see in just that example you gave, they spend a ton of money and their percent funded actually increased. So sometimes spending money is going to help your percent funded.
Yeah, great point. We're setting up the funds to be available for you to take on projects on time and on scope, and that helps you avoid the deterioration and the scope creep, right? So deterioration can increase projects anywhere from 3 to 10 times. You want to try to avoid that situation. And so the million-dollar question, what about inflation? Was such a hot topic in 2020, 21, 22, 23, and on. And I'll tell you, even today, it's a hot topic with our clients. We're seeing project costs go up really, really rapidly. And we're doing our best to prepare our clients for real-world cost estimates. So we're constantly adjusting the component cost estimates through updates. But it's such an important thing, inflation. And so we have a lot of internal analysts, and one in particular in the Washington office ran an analysis. And he was able to determine that for every 1 point of increase in inflation, that means that reserve funding moving forward needs to increase by 22%. I mean, this is huge. So if you had reserve contributions, let's say per month, or actually per year, right? $20,000. If inflation went up by 1%, you would need to increase that by 22%, right? So that's a big number. And on screen, again, a lot of numbers on screen, but here's his analysis. We can share this with any of the participants on today's webinar. But he looked at a number of different clients and determined that some needed to increase their contributions by 20%, some by 19, some by 23%, but the average was 22%. So just remember that inflation plays a really key role in what your cash flow analysis needs are moving forward. And then the alternative question is, won't interest offset inflation? So when inflation was going up really, really rapidly, the Fed came in and they said, hey, we're going to raise the rates. And thus, you're able to earn more on your monies. And that's a good thing for our clients, right? Some of our clients have hundreds of thousands of dollars set aside. Some of them have millions of dollars. So for every one extra point of interest earned, it helps them kind of offset some stuff. But it doesn't offset everything consistently, right? So it does not offset the 22% increase in interest. I'm sorry, the 1% increase in interest, which needs 22% more in reserve contributions, but it does offset some, and it only offsets it by 6.6%. So every 1 point of interest earned will help offset your needs for reserve funding by 6.6%. And here's all the numbers. Again, we can share them with you. But the reasoning behind this is because inflation works on the entire cost. And it's not just the cost of one item, it's the cost of all the items in all future years, where interest only works on cash on hand. And remember, we talked earlier about a lot of our clients being underfunded. And so if you only have, say, 20% funding, so percent funded, then it's only going to work on that little ratio. And so the average is that it doesn't necessarily offset all of inflation. It'll offset some of inflation.
So
we're going to open up some dialogue here.
Yeah, so the question is, then we've thrown a lot of information at people, and so we're going to answer the question of how do we prepare, and obviously what we are going to tell you is make sure you're making adequate reserve allocations. Definitely revisit your reserve study regularly. Talking about that pool heater that I discussed earlier, make sure everything's in there. Make sure that the history of your community is captured properly in your reserve study. Listen to trusted advisors. We're entering into a new phase in HOA life where subject matter experts are becoming a lot more important. We learned that with the balcony inspections. We're about to learn that with the utility bill that's gone through. So make sure you guys, as board members and managers, are listening to your trusted advisors. And then the next one is, why do we prepare? Derek, if you wouldn't mind going to the next slide.
Yeah.
Number one, because deterioration is real. For our accountants on the call, think of it as depreciation. It's an expense that needs to be offset. It's like a bill, like any other bill. When we are looking at roofs, they deteriorate. We need to pay that bill for that deterioration. And the best thing that we can do there is just to offset that deterioration and spread it out.
Yeah, Sean, I just want to point out that what this translates to is pay for your fair share. Like if you live within a building, like a condo, and you live under the roof for 1 year, then you should pay for 1 year's worth of that roof.
100%,
so
yeah.
When we can set up appropriate funding, then you pay for your fair share. Then it's equitable to all current owners and future owners.
Yes. And our next slide is really the top 5 objections that you guys, as board members and managers, are going to hear. Is we can't afford an increase. The owners will be angry. You can't avoid it. The best is to plan and be transparent. We'd rather keep our money and personally invest. It's the association's money. It's not your money. Reserve studies are too conservative. I think we've learned over the last 6 years since the 2020 lockdowns that's not the case. Construction costs have actually outpaced predicted inflation going back then. So, and then the other one, this is big in a lot of communities, will be long gone in 20 years. And that goes back to Derek's example he just gave, you're living there. You need to pay your fair share of the deterioration that's occurring. And then we don't do it this way. We special assess when we need to. And it's a really bad way to plan because number one, human beings have a nature, and their nature is not to tax themselves. And a special assessment is asking a community to tax themselves. No politician has ever achieved office by saying, "Hey, I'm going to tax you really badly." They always say, "Well, we're going to tax other people and give you stuff." So most people are not going to vote for a special assessment. When it does happen, it's usually um, uh, a rare event. So we want to make sure we're planning around that. We don't want to be planning on something that doesn't happen very often. And when you get these objections, call your reserve study advisor. Ask them. They should be able to give you really good answers on that.
Yeah, great point, Sean.
And then one thing that we always touch on is there is the other tool in the toolbox for boards, and that's taking out a loan. And there are going to be times when you as a community have to take out a loan, and that's not it's not the end of the world. But if we're doing it to replace a $250,000 roof, as you can see, if we are earning interest on our money, then that $250,000 roof is only $231,000 for us as a community. If we get that special assessment, then we're going to pay $250,000 for that roof. But if we take out a loan, we're going to pay $320,000 for that roof. So that's about a $90,000 swing. And every single community I work with, $90,000 is a lot of money. $90,000 is a lot of money to be paying other people when we could be earning that interest on our own money. So they're going to happen, but let's try to avoid them. Special assessments, they're disruptive, they're inherently unfair, they're definitely avoidable. They're not certain they'll pass. They build distrust in board and leadership. Usually, when special assessments happen, a very logical next step that ends up happening is recalls. And it does lower property values. Real estate agents will tell people, hey, this place has a lot of special assessments.
Special assessments are nightmares for community associations. Ultimately, you guys are all neighbors. You have to live next to one another. And when a special assessment comes down the pike, then it's just an uncomfortable position to be in, having to be neighbors and having all these 6 points happen all at the same time.
Yep, agreed. And loans are expensive. You're not certain you'll qualify. I literally received 3 emails this week about loans and problems that communities are having with loans. Qualification and funding takes valuable time. It injects banker ownership on your budget, which is going to be very annoying. And it's going to complicate sales and transactions and closings. So, big nightmare in California. So make sure we are funding the reserve account through regular contributions. We want to be proactive and not reactive. And for you guys, it's always good to know basic construction red flags. Know why asphalt's failing. Know why your roof is failing. See these things because we can see them coming.
Yeah, us reserve analysts can help you guys flag some of these. So when we walk the property, if you'll meet with us on a site visit, we can help show you some of this.
All right, and with that, we'll turn it back over to Paige for questions.
All right. Thank you so much, Derek, Sean, and Sean. We are going to dive into some questions here. We had a lot of good ones submitted. All right, let's start here. Would the infrequent but reoccurring expenses such as Senate Bill 326 inspection or reserve studies themselves count towards operating funds or reserve funds?
I'll take this one. Very good question. The decking inspections required every 9 years. It's definitely association obligation. It's pertaining to common areas. It has predictable life and cost. So yes, we do include the 9-year balcony inspections in all our reserve studies. This is actually backed up by the updated CAI reserve study guidelines. There's a 3-part test, but they also threw out 18 additional component selection guidelines. One of them is that components are not restricted to physical items, and it elaborates on the next point. 11 of their guidelines: professional inspections, evaluations, or related building services qualify as reserve components.
All right. What would you do if you have found components missing from your study and question if the reserve study is complete?
I would generally just add them in. If they comply with the three-part test, I would add them in. That it's a somewhat regular occurrence that when I'm performing a site inspection, I'm generally looking for what was missed. Is there something that was not found in the past? Because that's our job. We want to make sure that we're capturing that. And the reserve study is a living document, so we want to make sure that we include that going forward.
Yeah, I'll add on to that. The reserve study is definitely a living, breathing document. And as these communities mature, there's more needs. So we're looking to continuously add components based on their needs. Sean Kargari pointed out the decking inspection. That wasn't a need, I think 7, 8 years ago. And then it was added later on. So we're adding components as these communities age.
Great. Okay. What are things to look for to ensure that the initial site visit is done thoroughly and competently?
Join us. Put your eyes on the process. It's as we said earlier, we always love having the board's experience with the community. But make sure that the inspector is spending the appropriate time at your property. We're only there once every 3 years for that 3 year site inspection. But if we're doing a full inspection for a good sized property, it could be an all day, it could be a multi-day inspection. So, make sure the inspector is just not going at it with too broad a brush, isn't very curious, doesn't want, to have all the doors open. We need to get our eyes on every piece of the common areas. So, some oversight is definitely appropriate.
How do you address homeowners who or board members who are concerned that a reserve study will reveal too much and result in unnecessary work?
Well, I don't know that it would reveal too much. We want to always just be telling the truth, right? And so if we tell the truth and we rely on National Reserve Study standards, we will give them an accurate snapshot in time of their community. And I don't know about revealing too much. It's a matter of, does your asphalt need to be sealed? Do your buildings need to be painted? Does your roof need to be replaced? We don't want to hide anything. We want to make sure that we're giving an accurate depiction to our owners.
Yeah, reserve studies cannot control deterioration. It can only help you manage it. So the common areas are going to deteriorate whether you're planning or not, and that's going to have real consequences. And that's the whole point of the reserve study, to make that as affordable and as smooth of a process as possible.
What a reserve study can do is help you highlight what your needs are and help you avoid deferred maintenance. And deferred maintenance is very expensive. So when you mention it helping reveal too much, I mean, it's revealing good things for you to help understand and identify how to manage your property, your project moving forward.
Okay. If the remaining useful life is at 0, but the component appears not to need replacing, should it be replaced or wait till it fails?
If it's inconsequential, something that the board can determine just based on, their common sense, then you do not have to replace. If it's a complicated system like elevator or fire alarm, certainly get the opinion of your service provider before making such a call, because you don't want to take on that expertise as a board when, that's a higher level of specialty that you should rely on your experts before delaying any sort of important project like that.
All right. Do you have any recommendations to HOAs who have been doing their best to fund efficiently and really don't want to increase dues, but are now seeing massive increases to insurance premiums?
Well, unfortunately, there's no workaround there. You're going to have to increase your assessments. I hate to say it this way, but one of the truths that I found throughout my long career here at Association Reserves is keeping dues low as a policy is a bad policy. We always want to we want to be thinking on good years. We're seeing inflation at 3%. So we want to increase assessments by 3%, or else we're taking steps backwards. With the insurance situation, I'm hoping that that's stabilizing now, but my assumption is assessments are going to continue to go up, uh, and probably up very quickly over the next 3 to 5 years as that situation continues to stabilize.
Okay, great. Sean Kargari, did you want to touch really quick on what the three-part test is again? Oh, you're muted.
Sorry about that. The three-part test is number one, it has to be association obligation to maintain based on your governing documents. Number two, the need and the schedule for the project can be reasonably anticipated. And number three, the total cost of the project is material to the association, can be reasonably estimated, and includes all direct and related costs. So if we have, if you're renovating a nice fancy lobby, you can include the design fees, the permits, all the warehouse fees for the new materials going in.
Thank you. I have a community that has a tot lot, and they are deciding to put a vote to the membership to demo it and replace with picnic benches and possibly an arbor. Could they use the current funds in the reserves to demo it if the vote passes?
I'd always recommend checking with your HOA attorney first. It's possible, but we would need to know more details on it. I would start with the attorney.
All right. Our pipe replacements with surface with blockages and leaks and clearing the pipes, is that a reserve or operating expense?
For more and more of my clients, we're adding in plumbing. There's SB 900 that's coming out, and it has to do with the utilities that service the community association. And there's more emphasis on adding line items and inspections for those type of components into studies. So I'll say generally with like a broad brush that we're starting to add those to reserve studies more and more as more information becomes available.
Yeah, just to add to that, especially because in Orange County, you can almost draw a line through North and South Orange County. And in South Orange County, you're going to have slab leaks and you're going to need pipe replacement. So it's become a very regular component that we're including in reserve studies.
Okay, we went a couple minutes over, but a lot of great questions. We have time for one final question here. Can or should boards use reserves for emergency expenditures? What if something that's not in the reserve study suddenly needs to be paid for?
You do have the ability in the state of California to borrow from your reserve fund if it's not truly a reserve project or a reserve related. Definitely speak with your attorney on how to disclose the borrowing, the intent behind it, and most of all, the repayment plan. But the civil code states that if you borrow from the reserve fund, the funds do need to be repaid within 12 months of that borrowing. So you do have some flexibility with the reserves. That is an added bonus by having a robust, strong reserve fund, is it gives you options in the, if something emergency arises. Some communities will borrow from reserves to pay the insurance premium to achieve a discount, stuff like that. So it definitely gives you more options in managing the affairs of your community to have strong reserves.
Awesome. Thank you so much, Sean, Derek, and Sean. That concludes our webinar. If anyone is interested in a recorded version of this or any other webinar, you can search for them on YouTube or on the Association Reserves webinars page. If you enjoyed today's session and would like to receive the Association Reserves newsletter or announcements of future webinars, please visit www.reservestudy.com and click the icon at the bottom of the page to sign up for the newsletter. As a reminder, certificates of completion will be emailed out within 1 week. I want to thank you all for attending. If you have any questions or if there's any way we can be of service to you, please don't hesitate to contact us. Thank you again. Goodbye.